right? You ever stop and really think about those big global players, China, the US, India?
Mm.
It's easy to just go with the picture that's painted, right? Like they're putting on this whole show for the world.
Mm-hmm.
But what if what we're seeing is just the highlight reel?
Exactly, yeah. Underneath those carefully constructed images, there are often complex realities that just get glossed over. Our job today is to peek behind the curtain of these three major countries, using some solid information to get a clearer, maybe quicker sense of what's really happening.
That's the mission. We're diving deep into China, the United States, and India. We've sifted through articles, reports, the nitty-gritty stuff to bring you the insights that don't always make the headlines.
Think of this as your, express lane to being well-informed. We've done the digging to pull out the key information you need to know.
Okay, so let's kick things off with China.
Yeah.
The vibe you usually get is like booming economy, everything's rock solid, right? Like a super efficient machine just keeps on going.
That's the image they definitely like, to project relentless progress and stability. But if you look closer, you see a different dynamic at play. There's significant pressure on economists within China to maintain a positive public outlook, even if the underlying data, tells a different story.
Yeah, we're talking about some serious pressure to be optimistic. Like,
Yeah.
we heard about Hong Ho from the Bank of Communications, apparently facing some heat just for putting out less than stellar predictions. Makes you wonder what the real picture is, if even the experts feel the need to, sugarcoat things.
Precisely. And it's not just about differing opinions. There are suggestions of actual manipulation of economic data. Take youth unemployment, for example. There's suspicions that these figures are being, let's say, adjusted to appear more favorable than they actually are. This could create a fundamentally misleading understanding of the economic situation.
So you've got this tight grip on the economic narrative, and then you factor in the massive social control aspect. I mean, the numbers are just staggering. Over 600 million surveillance cameras deployed across the country. That's not just keeping an eye on things. That's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
How might this level of surveillance kind of contribute to and maybe conceal underlying issues?
Well, that 2021 Comparitech study really highlighted it, didn't it? China's top ranking in surveillance per capita. It certainly raises important questions about the balance between societal control and, individual freedoms.
And that word stability keeps coming up, because we also can't ignore the real estate situation. I read that over half of household wealth in China is tied up in property. That's a huge chunk of change for regular folks riding on one sector.
Absolutely. And the troubles faced by major developers like Evergrande really challenge that notion of unwavering stability, don't they? When so much personal wealth is linked to a potentially fragile sector. Well, what are the wider implications for the financial security of everyday citizens?
It all makes you think, right? And one of our sources really put it out there. What happens when control gets mistaken for actual stability? It's a pretty heavy question to sit with.
It really forces you to consider the true foundations of that outward appearance of, order and progress.
Okay, let's switch gears then. Talk about the U.S. of A., land of the free, home of the brave. That's the story we all know, right?
That's the powerful image the United States projects: liberty, democracy, opportunity for everyone. But let's take a closer look at what's happening beneath that surface narrative.
Right, because when you dig into the data, some pretty serious inequalities just jump out. That racial wealth gap, for instance, the median white household, has 7 times the wealth of a black household.
7 times.
That's not just a small difference. That's a massive divide. What are some of the historical factors, the things that have contributed to this persistent disparity?
Indeed. It's difficult to talk about widespread prosperity when a significant portion of the population is so far behind economically. It certainly challenges the core ideal of equal opportunity.
And don't even get me started on healthcare. We shell out more per person than any other developed nation, right?
Yeah, according to the OECD figures.
Right.
Highest spending.
But are we seeing the best health outcomes for that investment? Doesn't always feel like it.
It raises a fundamental question, doesn't it? How truly free are you when simply staying healthy comes with such a significant financial burden? It puts a real price tag on basic well-being.
Then there's the whole issue of how many people we've got locked up. The U.S. holds, a quarter of the world's prisoners?
25%.
Even though we only make up about 5% of the global population.
Yeah.
Those numbers are just mind-blowing.
It forces a really uncomfortable but necessary conversation about who truly has access to liberty and justice within the United States. It definitely cracks that image of freedom for all.
Yeah, this whole idea of the illusion of liberty really hits home when you look at the details. Like, we're told if you work hard, you'll make it, right? That's the
The
dream.
classic narrative.
But when the top 1% controls over 32% of the wealth, that's according to the Fed, it makes you wonder just how level that playing field really is.
Mm.
What kind of systemic barriers might be, at play here?
What's particularly interesting is how that work hard and succeed narrative can sometimes, well, obscure the very real systemic obstacles that many individuals face. It's a way to perhaps avoid addressing deeper, more complex issues.
And it's not just about money, right? That idea of racial equality, even with all the progress we talk about.
Yeah.
The fact that Black Americans are still significantly more likely to be killed by police,
2.5 times more likely.
and the incredibly high poverty and suicide rates in Native American communities, those are harsh realities, hard to ignore. What does it really mean to celebrate diversity when such fundamental inequalities persist?
It really compels you to question the true meaning behind the symbolic gestures of equality when such significant disparities remain. What's the actual cost of maintaining that surface-level appearance of inclusivity?
And free speech. Sounds
Right.
awesome, but when misinformation spreads like wildfire on largely unregulated platforms,
Like Pew Research pointed out.
yeah, you've got to ask, if truth gets twisted and amplified for clicks and shares, is speech really all that free? Or is it just, marketable?
That's a critical point. When the pursuit of engagement and profit can overshadow the dissemination of accurate information, it can really erode the foundations of informed public discourse. At what point does the freedom to speak anything trump the responsibility to speak truthfully?
And we can't forget that top spot in incarceration. The Prison Policy Initiative lays out the numbers, and the disproportionate impact on Black and Latino communities. It makes you seriously question who those tough-on-crime policies are really meant to protect.
Exactly.
It certainly challenges that simple narrative of public safety for all.
Exactly. So when you put it all together, that prompt from the source really resonates. How free are you when survival comes with a price tag? It really makes you think beyond the slogans.
For sure. It all kind of boils down to this. Freedom, justice, and quality, powerful words. But are we actually reading the fine print? What's the unwritten story there?
It requires a constant process of questioning and digging deeper, always.
All right, let's head over to India now. Often seen as this massive developing democracy, a real up-and-comer on the world stage.
That's the prevailing image, yeah. The mask, if you will, of a dynamic and expanding democracy. But as we've seen with other nations, scratching beneath the surface reveals some uncomfortable truths.
Yeah, the persistent issue of child labor is a big one. Over 10 million kids still caught in labor,
10 million.
even with laws against it.
Yeah.
That's a heartbreaking reality that doesn't quite fit the picture of a booming modern nation. What are some of the core socioeconomic factors that keep this cycle going, do you think?
Well, the ILO and UNICEF data from 2021 really underscores the sheer scale of this problem. It presents a stark contrast, like you said, to the image of a rapidly progressing nation.
And the environmental challenges are just huge. I mean, the Teesta and Yamuna rivers, among the most polluted on the planet.
Right.
And Delhi regularly tops the charts for the most polluted city globally. You can't really talk about development without acknowledging that human and environmental cost.
Absolutely. The WHO's data paints a very concerning picture of the public health crisis linked to this level of pollution. It's often a direct consequence of prioritizing rapid economic growth over environmental safeguards. That tension is always there.
Then you've got this rise in hate speech and internet shutdowns. India had the most shutdowns worldwide in 2023.
According to the Access Now report, yes, most shutdowns.
That feels pretty contradictory to the whole democracy thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How does shutting down communication channels impact the ability of citizens to even voice their concerns?
It certainly raises significant questions about the genuine freedom of expression and the ability of citizens to organize and express dissent in a meaningful way. When the internet is cut off, those voices are effectively silenced. It's a blunt tool.
And it's like India's wearing this friendly democratic partner mask on the global stage,
Yeah.
especially with the whole dynamic with China.
Mm-hmm.
But underneath, there are these really serious ongoing issues like caste oppression, gender violence, and that persistent environmental neglect we mentioned. How does India's geopolitical role maybe influence the scrutiny it faces on these internal issues.
That's a crucial point. Geopolitical positioning can sometimes create a dynamic where domestic issues receive less international attention, less focus. Freedom House's rating of India as partly free due to increased harassment of journalists and critics.
Yeah.
That indicates some of these underlying strains.
Right, and Human Rights Watch has also highlighted these restrictions on free speech and the discrimination against minorities.
Yep.
It paints a picture of a democracy facing, well, significant challenges. Going into specifics, that UNICEF report, almost 2 million kids in child labor, often in really tough jobs like agriculture, industry. It's just devastating.
Yeah.
And the fact that India has the highest number of child brides globally, some studies suggesting multiple girls forced into marriage every single minute. It's a crisis.
It's hard to even comprehend that scale.
And the stats on violence against women are just horrifying. Over 31,000 reported rapes in 2022 alone. Those high-profile cases that spark protests, they really show how deep-rooted the systemic issues are.
They shine a spotlight, but the underlying problems persist.
Plus, the fact that female workforce participation is so low, below 33%, partly because of safety concerns and societal norms, that's a massive barrier to progress, right?
Huge economic and social implications.
And the pollution in cities like Delhi, even with the CPCB, the Pollution Control Board, trying to regulate things, it just shows how tough it is to enforce those rules and really prioritize environmental health.
Enforcement is always the challenge.
So, with all this going on, and India being such a key player in outsourcing and having these strategic partnerships, especially with Western nations looking for a counterbalance to China, it makes you wonder if there's a bit of a maybe vested interest globally in not looking too closely at some of these internal problems.
There's definitely a complex interplay of economic and geopolitical factors at work. It can certainly influence the degree of scrutiny a nation faces regarding its domestic affairs. It's a balancing act for many countries.
Which brings us to that core question. Can a democracy truly flourish when voices are being silenced and fundamental rights are being challenged in these ways? It's something we really need to grapple with.
It forces you to think critically about the essential principles of democracy and whether they are consistently being upheld in practice, not just in name.
So we've taken a good look at these three major countries, and this whole idea of the mask keeps coming up. It's not just one simple thing. It's happening on, like, different levels.
Absolutely. As our source material implies, there's the political mask nations projecting a certain image of themselves on the world stage. Think democracy or international partnership used in a very deliberate way.
Then you've got the economic mask, where companies or even countries might talk about progress, while the reality involves things like worker exploitation or environmental shortcuts.
Yeah, hiding the true cost. And we shouldn't forget the cultural or social mask, where a society might present an image of modernity and advancement while still holding on to deeply problematic traditions or practices, like we saw with India.
And let's be real, we all wear masks in our own lives sometimes, right?
Yep.
To fit in, maybe hide what we see as weaknesses, it's a pretty universal human thing.
Which leads to that really insightful question from the source. Is the mask we wear primarily for the benefit of others, or is it something we put on for ourselves, so we can better believe the story we tell ourselves? It's a powerful thing to consider.
It really is. And it brings us to this poem we found called The Mask. There are a few lines that just really hit home when we think about what we've been discussing. For China and India, that line about smog still stains the morning sky and silence fills the prayer, it really captures the pollution and the suppression of dissenting voices.
Exactly. It's so visual. And for India, children toil with weary eyes beneath the old marquee paints such a vivid picture of the child labor issue we talked about.
Yeah. And when I think about the U.S., that line, who remembers voices drowned or tears that data hides, that really speaks to the way misinformation can overshadow real suffering and how statistics might not always tell the full story,
Hides the human element.
And then there's justice quietly grows cold, which really resonates with the inequities we've uncovered.
The poem does a remarkable job of capturing this core idea that beneath the carefully constructed surface, there are often very different and complex realities. It makes you wonder what else might be hidden in plain sight.
So we've taken this deep dive into China, the United States, and India. And what's super clear is that there's often a huge difference between the image these major nations present and the much more complicated realities on the ground.
And it's so important to remember, like we said, this isn't about pointing fingers or trying to assign blame. It's really about cultivating a deeper sense of awareness, a more nuanced understanding of the world we live in.
Exactly. Our source put it perfectly. Three giants, three masks. And behind them, real people struggling, surviving, resisting. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Because when we remove the masks, only then can we see clearly enough to change.
It's about looking beyond the easy headlines and the national narratives to truly see the human stories underneath. That's the goal.
And it makes you think, doesn't it? Taking a cue from the end of that poem, who's wearing the mask in the stories you're hearing? And maybe even more importantly, in the stories you're telling yourself. Maybe really understanding things starts with just questioning what you see on the surface.
They speak of light and liberty while ash still coats the air. Painted walls of dignity, but no one's really there. They wrap the lies in silver skin with smiles that never crack. But children scream beneath the tin with no one watching back. Who wears the mask? Who hides the blade? Who sells the truth they've never made? Is it the hero in the light, or the coward in the shade? Who wears the mask, and who obeys? A handshake made of static code, a future on a screen. But somewhere deep, a mother cries for all that's left unseen. Who wears the mask, and who obeys? A handshake made of static code, a future on a screen. But somewhere deep, a mother cries for all that's left unseen. Who wears the